Is a therapist forced to call the police when a client admits to have committed a murder? Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sack Talk with Anna. If you don't know me, my name is Anna. I am a therapist trainee and I'm currently working with veterans. In today's episode, I will be talking about whether or not therapists are forced to breach confidentiality when a client admits to have committed a murder. So, is a therapist forced to breach confidentiality and call the police when a client admits to have committed a murder? Short answer is no. So, if a client commits to have committed a murder, therapists are not actually allowed to call the police. There will be a breach of confidentiality, and the therapist can lose his or her license. So, we're not supposed to call the police or tell anybody unless it was a child or elderly person. However, it gets tricky because there had to be child abuse or elderly abuse involved. So I know it can be confusing, but basically, if the client has committed a murder, which included a child or an elderly person, and abuse was involved, then the therapist is forced to call the police. So if the killing does not meet the legal definition of abuse or neglect, for example, a war zone scenario, an accident without neglect, or self-defense, mandatory reporting usually does not apply. In what other cases is a therapist forced to call the police when a client is playing around with the idea of harming someone else? So when the danger is imminent, then the therapist has to call the police. If there is an identifiable victim, if there is a concrete plan. And so if the therapist determines that the client, for sure, there is a certainty that is going to commit a murder, then of course the therapist has to call the police. However, again, if the client has committed a murder in the past that does not include child abuse or elderly abuse, then the therapist is not forced to call the police. Now you may be wondering, what if the murder was actually recent and there is an ongoing investigation? Even in that case, unfortunately, the therapist is not allowed to call the police and share that information because that will be a breach of confidentiality. You may be wondering as well, why are these laws in place? So the reasoning is because if certain rules like this were not in place, then we will not have clients, in the sense that if the client fears sharing with us anything, even things that are the darkest, then they will not go through therapy at all. And another reason why these laws is because it can actually prevent harm from happening. Because let's say a client has shared with us that they have committed murder in the past, and we're not sharing that with the police. And then they are kind of playing with the idea of doing something harmful in the future. Then the client feels more comfortable sharing that information with us. Then, of course, we have to tell the client that if they are planning on committing something, then we will have to breach confidentiality, but the rapport with the therapist has already been built, and so they are more likely to share with the therapist whatever is going on in their mind. Now, if a subpoena or court order is issued, then the therapist is forced to share their notes with the court. And in that case, then the past crime is going to be exposed. So voluntary disclosure, it is not a thing, but court disclosure, it is a thing. So again, if you have a court order client and then let's say they commit a crime, and they recently have disclosed to you about their past crimes, then obviously you have to write it on your notes, and then when you get called for the hearing, you will have to share those notes with the court, and then everything will come into the surface. But yeah, this is the end of the episode. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any questions, and yeah, let me know your opinion. I'm curious. Thank you for watching.